Hello everyone and welcome back. Today I'm continuing my How to Linux series, and if you want to see my previous Linux videos, I'll put a link to that playlist in the description for you to check out. In today's episode, I'm going to go over copying, moving, and renaming files and directories. So with that, let's jump right in. So the first command we're going to go over today is the copy command. So as you can guess, this is going to copy a file. It's its most basic function, and the way we use this command is we will type cp for copy. Before we do copy, we're going to just list the contents. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use new file. So let's say I want to copy new file, and I need to have another copy of it. So I'm going to do copy new file, and what I'll do is I'm just going to call it new file 2. So nice and simple. I hit enter, and now when I list the contents, we see new file and we see new file 2. So perfect. This did exactly what I needed. I was able to take a copy of an existing file, and it's duplicated. And what I'll do is I'm going to cat new file, and so we see the output there. But now I'm going to cat new file 2, and notice I have the exact same content. So this is perfect. It's just a duplication of the data on the system, and I'm able to give it another file name. I could also move it to another directory if I wanted to, so I'll show you that. So let's say I wanted to take new file 2 and I want to copy that into my temp directory. So I'm going to do copy, I'm going to do new file 2, and I'm going to specify, I'm going to copy it from where I am, but I'm going to put it in my temp directory because maybe that's just where I need it to be. So I do copy, I give it the file name, and now I'm going to give a directory, and what I did is when I hit tab, it auto-filled the / for me, which specifies a directory. And this is important because if I didn't specify or didn't include the / the copy command would actually try to rename my file and say, well, I'm going to copy it and rename it. And it would say new file 2, the data that's in that file, the text that's in there, is now going to be in a file that's called my temp directory. And that wouldn't be good. That's not what I'm looking for. So since I want to put it in this directory, I end it with a / and that will tell the copy command I'm actually copying this file into a directory. So I'm going to hit enter, and now when I list my temp directory, and I'm just going to specify new file 2, it autofilled, but when I hit enter to list it, we see that the file's there. And now I'm going to just cat that file, so my temp directory, new file 2. Once again, I have another copy of this file on the system, and it's in a different location. So you can use copy to make a copy in the same directory that you're in, or you can move it to another directory entirely. Just know that when you're copying the file, you're taking the contents and the data within it, and you're duplicating it on the system, meaning if you have a 1 megabyte file and you copy it, now you have 2 1 megabyte files on your system, and it's not reusing the data. It's very important to know that it is another copy of the same data on the system, and it is treated differently. So now that we've seen how to make a basic copy, why would we make a copy? So like I said, just duplicating the data, sure, maybe you have a reason to do that. Putting it in another location, kind of as a backup, sure, that's fine. But another reason why we use the copy command as an administrator is to take a backup of a file before you edit it. So remember, when we edit files, whatever's in that file tells the system how it's going to work. And if you mess it up, you need to be able to undo those changes, and copy is a great way for the way administrators at least will back up a file that's currently working. We can go make edits to that file, and if we really mess something up, we can revert it back because we have the extra copy that hasn't been modified. So I'll give you an example using the sshd config copy file. So I'm just going to list my directory here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a backup of my sshd config copy file. So I'm going to do copy ssh, hit tab to autofill, and now I'm going to do the same thing again, but I'm going to delete the last character, and I'm going to add a simple .bak. And this is just the easiest way that you can make a backup. Most people recognize it as the backup, file extension. On Linux, it's not required, but if you come from a Windows system, you know that typically the last 3 or 4 characters after the dot, that gives you an idea of what type of file it is. In this case, .bak is simply a good way to realize that you're using or looking at a backup file. So, like I said, that's a basic way. And once again, I'm going to show the backup, and what it'll be hard to tell from here, but what we'll do is I'm going to just cat the original one as well. And as we can see, like just judging by the last few lines, we know it's the same. And we already confirmed with the smaller file too. So we're going to trust that it copied everything. This is a longer file. There are other commands to compare, but I don't want to go over that in this video. I just want to show you how we can copy and, in this case, take a backup. Another thing that I do want to highly recommend, something that I do as an administrator, is we made a backup with the .bak extension, but I typically like to also append the current date. Sometimes you might even do the date and time because, depending on, maybe you're making a lot of changes and you want multiple copies, to go back to, just in case one change doesn't work, or maybe changes start affecting each other. You can have different points in time that you're managing on the system to go back to. So what we'll do is, once again, we're going to do the copy ssh config, and rather than just do the .bak, I'm going to go a little further, and I'm going to add an underscore, and this is just to separate it out. So I'm going to follow that up with the 4-digit year, followed by the 2-digit month, and then the 2-digit day of the month. So in this case, it'll be 2023, 10, and 21. So when I do this and I do a listing, notice I have an original backup, but I also have a backup with the date appended to it. And like I said, the reason why I do this is it's almost like a secondary precaution. We have the date here on when the file was last modified. However, let's say you took a backup, and after the backup was taken, somebody went and modified that file and you weren't aware. Maybe you have multiple people working on the system. Adding the date in the file is just a good way for you to verify that, well, this is when I took the backup. It shouldn't have been touched after that. And if you see that the date has been modified on this part of the file, in the listing, then that can give you an idea that somebody may have modified it. Perhaps it was you, maybe it's somebody else, but it'll help you to be extra cautious when reverting back, which causes problems in itself, but it's good for your awareness because you need to be able to trust that a backup file is going to be a good, trusted backup. So that's how you can use the copy command to make copies of files and make backups. And next we're going to go over how to copy entire directories. So the way we're going to copy a directory is we're going to utilize a flag with the command. So in this case, we're going to list out recursively, we'll do my temp directory. And as we can tell, I've got a lot of stuff in here, so I just put this out there just to use this as an example here. So I'm going to try something. I'm going to just copy, and I'm going to do my temp directory. And let's say I'm going to call it my temp directory, but I'm going to add a 2 on the end, right? So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to hit enter. We get an error. Okay, it's telling me -r isn't specified, so it's not going to touch this directory. Copy is meant for files, and in this case, the directory has subdirectories. It has files within it and all those things that belong to that directory. And with copy, we have to specifically tell it we are wanting all of that content to be copied with the directory. If it's empty, then sure, we could just copy the directory itself and it might move over. But whenever we've got content in there, it's not going to do that. So we're going to use the error that it gave us, and we're going to use that. So copy -R. Now I'm going to do my temp directory, and then my temp directory, add a 2, and I'm going to hit enter. So I'm going to list. I now have 2 directories, and I'm going to do a long recursive listing of my temp directory 2, and notice this directory has all the same things that the other one had. I will hit up, I will delete this, and notice the other content is still there. My original content is there, so I now have duplicated an entire directory, which is useful. And so the reason why we do this is maybe as an example, I wanted to duplicate the file structure, right, and the directory structure that I have for that directory. That's one reason why I might duplicate it and then use it for another purpose. So it might have the same structure but different content in it. So that's when copying the entire directory and its subdirectories could be useful. But another way that I use it is to back up an application installation directory. So typically, you'll have a root install path for an application, and whatever that path is, all of your installation files for the application go there. And when you do an upgrade, you're modifying a lot of the content of that directory. And by taking a recursive backup, you stop the application. This is known as a cold backup. You stop the application, you use copy, and this is just one of many ways to do it, but you can do a recursive copy of that application home path, and you can duplicate it on the system. Now, if you have an application that's several gigabytes in size, you're going to duplicate several gigabytes in size, so be aware of that. For file constraint concerns. But typically, it's a fast way to say, okay, take everything that I had, give me another copy, and when you do the upgrade, if you mess up, it gives you a quick alternative to say, let me just get rid of what I've done, and in case of emergency, I can just move that directory back to its original name, and the application can be started and typically function normally. So once again, you're not backing up one file, you're backing up a directory and its contents, so all of the files there, and that's very useful to ensure things keep working on the system. So now that we've gone over how to copy files and directories and their contents, we're going to move over into simply moving files. So in this case, we'll just jump right in, and it'll be the same structure as the copy command. You give it the command we're going to use is mv, so that's to move a file, and we're going to give a file name. So we're going to, in this case, you know what? Let's list the directories and everything here. So we're going to move one of our backup files here. So I'm going to do move sshd, hit tab. I want to specify a backup file, and I want to use my dated backup file just because that's what I prefer. And I'm going to move it into my temp directory. So I'm going to do my temp, hit tab, and then I'm going to use the / to specify I want it to go into that directory. So this is a simple way to do it. I've got everything correct, move, the file that I want, and then the directory. And I'm going to hit enter. And now when I do a listing, I no longer have the dated backup directory, but if I do a listing of my temp directory and hit enter, I now see sshd underscore config dash copy.bak underscore the date. So perfect. I moved that file from one location to another on the system. And what this does is, it's important to know you're not actually moving the data on the disk itself or on the drive itself. The way file systems work is there's a pointer that references the actual data, and when you move it, you're actually just moving or updating the pointer to the data. So imagine the data sitting in section A on a drive, and you move it to another location. It's still in section A, like there's no reason for it to move, but there's a table that references that section A is where that file's contents are held, and that gets updated to the new path, so that way it can find the file. So as long as it's on the same partition, on the same drive, that's all it's doing. And what we'll go over later is I'll show you when we move it to another partition what happens. But it's good to know that you're not actually moving the data, it's just changing the pointer to the file. So what we can use move for is we moved it from one location to another, but we also use it to rename files. So I'm going to do a listing here, and let's cat file 1. All right, so there's Latin in here. So what I'm going to do is, file 1's not very specific. Maybe I just want to rename it. So the way you rename files in Linux is with the move command. So there's no rename command here. It's just simply use the move command, and we're going to say move file 1, and I'm going to call this Latin file 1. And when I hit enter and I do a listing, we can tell that file 1 was updated to Latin file 1. So you can rename it whatever you want to. Now there are special characters you should avoid, on the file system just because they have special meanings. But typically dashes and underscores perfectly fine and acceptable. Avoid using slashes, dollar signs, things like that. We'll get into those details eventually. But for now, as you can tell, I'm just using alphanumeric characters, so lowercase a through z, capital A through z, numbers, and dashes and underscores. Those are very safe and fine to use on the Linux system. So we just went ahead and renamed the file using move. Another thing we can use move for is it also renames directories. So copy can copy files and it can copy directories, but you need a flag. With move, that's it's a little different. You just use move to rename a file, and you just use move to rename a directory. Like I said, you're not actually changing the location or anything. It doesn't really matter about the difference between a file and a directory when you're renaming. So we will do. Let's go ahead and rename my temp directory 2, right? Maybe I meant to say let's make that my temp directory backup, right? So I'm going to say move my temp directory 2, and I'm going to specify my temp directory, and I'll just do dash BAK because it's a directory. Typically I like to have files with a dot, just because a lot of people recognize that as a file with an extension, and then directories don't typically, or don't have extensions actually. So I'm going to just rename my temp directory 2 to my temp directory dash BAK. So hit enter, and when I list it, we can now see that my directory was renamed. We didn't get a warning like we did with the copy command, which is nice, but that's another way to use the move command to rename a directory as well as files. All right, and so one last thing before we're done with these topics is I went ahead and just generated a large file, a 1 gigabyte file. We'll go over this command and its use in another video, but in this case, just you can see that the output says I have basically a 1 gigabyte file, and I called it very large file. So I'm going to do a listing here. And what I wanted to show you is I'm going to move this to another directory, and I want you to see the time frame. So this is referring back to the data not actually moving if it's on the same volume. So I'm going to just move this file, move very large file, and I'm going to move it to my directory. And notice the prompt comes back instantly. It's very quick, and it took a few seconds at least for that 1 gigabyte file to be created. And if it's moving the actual data, I would expect to wait a few seconds for that to occur. But in this case, the prompt comes back immediately. If I list my directory and then very large file, I can see that it's there, and actually we'll do, we'll use ls-lh just to see the size. So we have a 1 gigabyte file of just basically nothing, but it's taking up 1 gigabyte on the system. And it took no time at all, though, to move it from one directory to another directory on the same volume or the same partition on my system. So I'm going to now move this to another partition, and we'll go over this command later, but this is df, well, we'll show you the disk file systems that are available, and currently I'm working under this slash directory, and notice I've got I'm using 1.6 gigabytes. One of those is that file I created, but I want to move it to somewhere completely different, and I'm going to use this mount D partition over here. So notice I'm going to now I'm going to move, I have to specify my directory and then very large file. And so now I'm going to move this file to /mnt. I have to fully qualify it, meaning I start with the /. So I'm going to do D and then slash, and then that's all I have to do. It's going to go into my directory and take very large file, and it's going to move it to /mnt/d and put the file there. So when I hit enter, watch. So notice the prompt is hanging. It hung for a couple seconds, and that's because it actually had to take the data, write it to the new volume, and then it removes the volume from my current partition. So if I do a listing of my directory, there's no very large file. But if I do a listing of mount D, I now see a very large file there. Awesome. That's exactly what I wanted to do. And so it's good to know about how this works, because sometimes when you're moving files, depending on what volume or sorry, what drive you're using, it can take longer for things to back up than based on where you're moving the file. I've moved hundreds of gigabytes before, and that can take a long time depending on which file or partition you're moving from. And so if it's on the same volume or on the same partition, it will just change the pointer and it's updated. If you're moving it to another partition, just be aware that it might take a little bit of time for that to occur. And so what I'm going to do now is, just because I don't want to forget about this file here, I've been working in my home directory, I'm going to move this file back. So I'm going to do /mnt d very large file, and I'm going to just, I'm in my home directory, so I can use dot for here. I can use the tilde. You can check out my other videos about these details using, about your home directory and things like that. But I'm going to just specify dot because I want to put it right back here. Hit enter. We see it takes another few seconds again. But now when I list my home directory, very large file is back. That's what I wanted to do, so I don't forget about it. But now we know how to move files, and we know a little bit more about what happens moving between partitions or different volumes on the system. And before I complete this video, I do want to show you one other thing with move. So we moved files, we moved large ones. I showed you how to rename files and directories with it, but I didn't go over how to move a directory itself. And that is possible. We can do that. So what I'm going to do is, let's say I've got my temp directory and the backup one. Let's say I want to move that into my directory, right? So let's go ahead and simply do that. I'm going to just do move. Let's move my temp directory -bak, and I want to move the entire thing into my directory, right? So maybe I just don't want it out of here. I try to keep my file systems clean and organized. Helps me work efficiently. So I'm going to just say, you know what? I don't want you here. I want you over here in my directory. So when I hit enter, I'll do a listing. I no longer have my temp directory -bak, but I'm going to cd into my directory this time, do a listing, and now I can see my temp directory -bak. So when you have a directory, you can move it like a file. Once again, copy, you have to use the -r flag. With move, you do not. You can just say, okay, whatever is my starting point, this directory, anything from here down is going to be moved, and it'll just bring everything with it. That's the magic of the move command, and I wanted to make sure that I pointed that out as well, that you can move files and you can also move directories in Linux.